A 10-year-old black boy spoke honestly. His teacher publicly embarrassed him before the entire class. But a more significant moment occurred when his father, the mayor, entered the room silently. This incident began immediately following the morning announcements at Oakwood Elementary in Topeka, Kansas. The bell had just sounded, and the noise of chairs moving and students taking their places echoed throughout the classroom. Mrs. Trudy Holbrook was positioned at the front, arms crossed as usual, tapping her pen against the whiteboard. She was a teacher known for her rigid approach, prioritizing rules over warmth. For most students, she was acceptable, strict, but reliable. 10-year-old Malik Jefferson was seated by the window in the third row back. He was one of those students who didn't speak often, but when he did, people paid attention. Not because he was boisterous, but because he always conveyed his thoughts with purpose. He felt a surge of quiet satisfaction that morning. The night before, his dad had held a significant press conference regarding new scholarships for underserved communities. Malik had watched him on television and believed the entire city was now aware of what he already knew. His dad cared. As Mrs. Holbrook reviewed the day's plans, she announced a special visitor would be coming to the school on Friday. She stated that someone from City Hall would be present, adjusting her glasses as she spoke. They hadn't informed me of the person involved. Malik's hand rose slightly. "Yes, Malik?" she inquired, her tone already showing irritation. "I believe it could be my father," he stated calmly. "He mentioned he was traveling here this week. He holds the position of mayor." The room fell silent. Several children glanced around. One girl murmured, "Wait, is that true?" Mrs. Holbrook looked at him. She then released a brief, abrupt laugh, more of a derisive sound. "Oh, Malik, that's quite imaginative," she remarked, extending the final word as if it were hurtful. He didn't smile, didn't laugh, just sat there, eyes forward. "I'm not making it up," he said softly. "He's Mayor Jefferson," she said, her smile fading. "Malik, this is a place for learning, not for telling stories. If the mayor were your father, I think we'd all know by now, don't you?" The silence was thicker now. Some of the kids shifted in their chairs. A boy in the back let out a quiet laugh. Malik stared at the desk in front of him. His hands remained still in his lap. "Let's focus on the facts, not stories," she stated, and continued the lesson. However, the class was no longer engaged, still processing her previous statement and tone. The words were not simply dismissive, they held a sharper edge, conveying a message. "Someone like you couldn't possibly be someone like that, son." The most painful aspect wasn't the content of her words, but the swiftness with which the class embraced them. Jasmine, who typically sat with Malik at lunch, avoided looking at him for the remainder of the morning. Two boys positioned by the window murmured and chuckled each time he spoke. Malik remained silent for the rest of the lesson, not due to fear, but because he felt it wasn't worthwhile. Afterward, that same day, in the hallway, his friend Bryce approached him close to the lockers. "Hey man," Bryce said, sounding somewhat unsure. Malik didn't pause. "Yeah," Bryce acknowledged slowly. She didn't need to phrase it that way. Bryce looked down, thinking she believed he was lying. Malik offered a hesitant shrug, suggesting she tell the principal. Would it make a difference? For a moment, Bryce couldn't respond. Inside the classroom, Mrs. Holbrook resumed teaching as if nothing had occurred. She likely assumed the incident was resolved. A student had made a false statement, and a teacher had corrected him. Case closed. But that's the nature of words. They don't always fade when the school day ends. The events didn't remain confined to the classroom, as someone beyond those walls had become aware of what occurred and intended to speak out. By Thursday morning, Malik felt uncomfortable. He woke up early, as he always did, dressed, and sat through breakfast with his mom, who observed his unusual quietness. He remained largely silent. He wasn't one to express complaints. That wasn't how he was raised. Nevertheless, a weighty feeling settled in his chest. The feeling lingered, the sting of speaking honestly and being met with derision. As he entered room 204, Mrs. Holbrook had already begun writing the warm-up exercise on the board. The classroom appeared identical to the previous day. The same rows of desks, the same posters on the walls, the same teacher present. Yet, something felt different. Students whispered more frequently than usual. Several glanced in Malik's direction before quickly averting their gaze. He noticed Jasmine whispering to a classmate, her eyes flickering towards him, a giggle escaping her lips. Then came the moment that reignited the tension. Mrs. Hallbrook started a history lesson, focusing on community leaders and local government. The situation felt heavy with irony, enough to fill the entire school. As she wrote the names of elected officials on the whiteboard, she briefly looked at Malik and gave a smile, but it lacked warmth. You know, she said, addressing the class, we should always be cautious about feigning a different identity. Honesty is particularly crucial for significant positions, such as mayor or governor. She refrained from mentioning his name, yet the effect was unmistakable. Every eye in the classroom shifted toward Malik, as if by design. He remained composed, lowering his head and recording the date in his notebook. Let's return to the facts, she continued, her smile unwavering. It's easy for anyone to claim they're the mayor's child. That assertion isn't enough. Verifiable evidence is what truly matters. A chuckle arose from somewhere in the rear of the classroom. The release was sudden, a brief moment where the pressure gave way. She made no effort to restrain it. In fact, she seemed to find it amusing, as if she's told a perfectly executed jest. However, to Malik, it wasn't a jest. It wasn't an instruction either. It was a disguised humiliation, presented with a formal demeanor and a whiteboard marker in her hand. He tightened his grip on his pencil, not to damage it, merely to maintain composure. Bryce was in the front row, visibly uneasy, his mouth slightly parted as if he had something to say but couldn't articulate it. The remainder of the lesson passed quickly. For the first time, Malik didn't volunteer any answers, didn't offer to read aloud, and didn't even complete the worksheet. During recess, he walked the edge of the playground by himself. No one inquired about his well-being. They were preoccupied with continuing to laugh at the joke. Bryce rejoined him again, close to the jungle gym. You really should tell someone I did, Malik said. Who? My mom. Is she going to call the school? She told my dad. Bryce blinked. Wait, the mayor, Malik nodded. There was a pause. What's he going to do? Malik looked out past the fence. He said I should keep showing up. That sounded simple, but it hit hard. Malik didn't need his dad to yell or storm the building. He needed to know someone still believed him. And he did. That afternoon, while students engaged in silent reading, Mrs. Hallbrook introduced the topic of respecting authority. She posed several questions and then stated, and naturally, we must not pretend to be someone we are not to achieve that authority. Such actions would be dishonest and disrespectful to genuine leaders in our community. She then made eye contact with Malik for a moment that felt deliberate and directed towards him. He looked up at her and then lowered his gaze to his book. Mrs. Hallbrook turned away, likely believing the issue was resolved. Perhaps she thought her brief remarks had restored order to the classroom, that the lesson had been conveyed, and her authority reasserted. However, she was unaware that another individual had listened intently and was approaching to ensure the lesson she believed she was imparting would be entirely revised. The dining hall at Oakwood Elementary was a noisy area, not due to disorder, but because of established habits, trays making sounds, chairs scraping, juice boxes opening. But that Thursday, a different sound was present, a sound that lingered around specific tables and focused on one name, as if it were a mark. Malik was seated opposite Bryce at the far end of table 5, pushing the tater tots around on his tray. He hadn't touched his chocolate milk, which was unusual. Typically, it was the first thing he consumed. Bryce spoke softly, drawing closer. People were still discussing it. I'm aware of that. I overheard Ava mention her mother said Mayor Jefferson's son attend a private school. Malik glanced up, his brow raised. Yes, I attend a private school. I only transferred here 2 months ago. My mother wanted me nearer to her workplace. Bryce rubbed his head. I suppose people just prefer to think you're being deceptive. They'd rather believe that than accept that I'm telling the truth. They both looked down the table, where 2 kids were giggling and whispering, glancing back and forth at Malik. One of them, a boy named Derek, leaned over and said, just loud enough, guess anyone can say their dad's the mayor now, huh? Malik didn't answer. Bryce stood up halfway, then stopped himself. "Not worth it," Malik muttered. The whole room felt colder, even though the sun poured through the windows like any other day, but kids had a way of carrying an echo. A statement, once made, lingered like a marble on a tile surface. It didn't disappear simply because the speaker stopped. Jasmine walked past their table accompanied by two friends, and one of them murmured, "He still thinks he's the mayor's kid." That was the instant Bryce rose to his feet. "You'll need to be quiet," he stated, his voice wavering a little. People turned to look. Jasmine appeared surprised briefly, then folded her arms. "We're merely expressing what everyone is already thinking." Perhaps it was time for everyone to reconsider perspectives like those of Mrs. Hellbrook. A noticeable change occurred. Several students visibly reacted, some widening their eyes. A few even murmured quietly amongst themselves. Bryce quickly took a seat, his heart racing. Malik remained silent, simply observing his friend. For the first time that day, a faint smile touched his lips. However, lunch continued. A girl named Kaylee, seated at a nearby table, raised her hand partway and said, "Wait, I saw Mayor Jefferson last year at the ribbon cutting at West Park. Didn't he have a kid with him?" Bryce turned to her. "Yeah, that was Malik." She squinted. His hair was different. "It was shorter back then," Malik said, finally speaking up. Kaylee stared at him. A few kids at her table grew quiet. One appeared unsure. Another leaned in and whispered something. Gradually, the doubts started to diminish. The structure remained intact, but it shifted slightly. That's often the beginning. Not with a declaration or an explanation, but with uncertainty, quiet, and absence in the usual sounds. When the bell signaled the end of lunch, Malik took his tray and rose. He didn't hurry, and he didn't droop. He moved with the composure of someone possessing knowledge that others lacked. Bryce followed. As they headed back, passing Mrs. Hallbrook's classroom, they observed her standing close to the doorway, talking to a different teacher. She noticed them but didn't smile. She simply observed. For 1 second too long, Bryce looked toward Malik. "She knows your dad's coming, doesn't she?" Malik replied. "He said he'd stop by today." They didn't converse much after that. There was nothing further to discuss. Rumors had spread throughout the building, and whether people accepted them was irrelevant, as the truth still had more to reveal about that classroom, because something significant was already unfolding and was nearer than anyone realized. By the time Anthony Jefferson entered his office at City Hall that Thursday morning, his phone had already buzzed twice. Carla, his assistant, was waiting, holding a folder and wearing the concerned expression she reserved for sensitive matters. "It's about Malik," she stated even before he had removed his blazer. Anthony paused. "What about him?" Carla quietly closed the door. "You might want to sit down." He remained standing. She opened the folder, which contained 2 printed emails. One was from another parent concerning an incident in Mrs. Hellbrook's classroom. The second message came from the school secretary, a person Anthony had known for years, informing him about a situation where his son was being questioned in front of others by his teacher concerning his family history. Anthony read both messages deliberately, with no visible emotion. He displayed neither anger nor panic. He simply sighed. Carla observed him intently. "Should I contact the school?" he asked. "No," he replied. "I will manage it myself." She nodded and departed silently. Anthony paused, his gaze fixed on the city map adorning the wall. He held a significant position. He was the first black mayor Topeka had elected. He had contested diligently for that office, not for the prestige, but driven by a belief in the power of visibility and representation, the conviction that young people like Malik should grow up feeling a sense of belonging. He settled into his chair, reached for his phone, and dialed a number from memory. "Hello." His wife answered. "Did Malik mention anything to you?" A moment of silence followed. "He recounted yesterday's events to me," she stated. However, he didn't wish to escalate the situation. "It is a significant matter," Anthony asserted. She publicly embarrassed him before everyone. His wife released a sigh. He claimed he was fine. "He isn't." Another pause followed. "So what's your plan?" "I'm going to the school. Would you like to accompany me?" "No, but I need you to collect him afterward." "Very well," she replied softly. "Make it meaningful." He ended the call, rose, retrieve his navy suit jacket from the back of the chair, and adjusted his tie in the mirror. The situation wasn't intended to be argumentative. He avoided unnecessary disagreements. However, certain teachings require direct interaction. As he exited the building, two aides attempted to detain him with urgent requests, but he dismissed them with a courteous yet resolute gesture. "This will be brief," he stated. The driver opened the vehicle door for him without prompting. No inquiries were made regarding his destination, yet they understood, judging by his expression, that it held significance. The journey to Oakwood Elementary proceeded in silence. As the car entered the school's visitor lot, several students were concluding recess. He observed Malik across the yard, heading toward the building with another boy. His demeanor appeared more subdued than normal. Anthony did not signal, nor did he speak. He simply watched. He waited in the front office for a brief period as the receptionist placed a call to room 204. She offered him coffee. He refused. After 10 minutes, a hallway aide directed him through the corridor. He proceeded deliberately, not due to apprehension, but to observe his surroundings. He needed time to assess the environment, the kind of world his son experienced while he attended city council meetings and addressed questions from reporters. Before entering room 204, he hesitated. He detected the sounds of a lesson taking place within. He allowed the aide to resume her duties, then carefully turned the handle and opened the door. The lesson abruptly ceased, 30 sets of eyes fixed on the doorway. Standing there, tall, poised, and not smiling, was Mayor Anthony Jefferson. Unbeknownst to those in the room, this visit wasn't related to politics. It concerned fatherhood, truth, and ensuring silence wouldn't prevail. The classroom fell silent, as if someone had pressed pause. Mrs. Holbrook's mouth slightly opened. Her marker remained suspended in the air, paused halfway through writing civic responsibility on the board. She didn't move for a moment. Every student's attention shifted from her to the man standing at the entryway. Malik glanced up. He paused momentarily. It wasn't due to apprehension, but something different. A sense of ease, familiarity. The way his father occupied a space wasn't with loudness or spectacle. It was with an inherent quality, a kind that didn't solicit focus. It simply existed. Mayor Jefferson entered, without haste, without agitation. He didn't appear upset. He didn't appear self-satisfied. He appeared like a man who was fully aware of what had been stated, and who wanted it to end. Mrs. Holbrook initiated the conversation. Mayor Jefferson, acknowledging with a single nod, responded, "I'm sure it is." She moved aside a little uncomfortably, almost as if making room for him, even though she appeared somewhat displaced. The mayor surveyed the surroundings. "I'd like to address the class briefly, if that's acceptable." She paused. "I hadn't been notified of I won't take long." She retreated further. Anthony Jefferson then turned to the students. "Some of you are familiar with me, and others may not be. I am Anthony Jefferson. I serve as the mayor of this city. But more importantly," he paused and let his eyes land on Malik. "I'm Malik's dad." The silence deepened. Not a cough, not a whisper. Even the kids who had been giggling the day before were frozen now. He continued, his tone even. "Yesterday and today, my son was told by someone in authority that he couldn't possibly be who he said he was. That claiming me as his father was some kind of joke." He didn't look at Mrs. Holbrook. Not once. Everyone understood who he was referring to. "I'm not intending to cause anyone discomfort. I don't support that approach. However, I do value significant instances. These are times when individuals gain an understanding of what respect entails and what it doesn't." He paused and looked around the classroom. Respect involves attentive listening, even when a person's narrative differs from your preconceived notions. It requires trusting a student when they speak, particularly when they are sharing their genuine experiences. And it necessitates acknowledging that your expectations do not determine another person's lived reality. A young woman in the front row fidgeted. Malik observed silently, without blinking, carefully taking in every word. Anthony continued. "Serving as mayor involves more than just legislation or official gatherings. It's about demonstrating the right behavior. My son didn't require me to protect him. He needed me to be present. And here I am, yet still no one moved. Then, gradually, he turned to address the woman seated at the room's front. Mrs. Holbrook, he said, his voice remaining even, I expect this won't recur. Not to my son, and not to any student. She started to speak, but remained silent. Only a brief, hesitant nod followed. He understood and addressed the class, saying, I'll leave you to your learning. Malik's gaze met his son's. We'll talk later, Malik acknowledged, nodding in return. A sense of release washed over him. The first easing he's felt all day. Mayor Jefferson departed without a ceremony or applause. The silence was profound, echoing more powerfully than any possible outburst. In the hallway, Anthony hesitated. He felt no need to glance over his shoulder. Within the classroom, there was no laughter. There was no murmuring. Mrs. Holbrook remained motionless, her hands clasped firmly. The lesson had ceased, yet a different atmosphere had begun. Despite the mayor's departure from the room, the consequences lingered. They persisted significantly. Certain statements cannot be undone, and certain realities remain even after the door shuts. The remainder of the school day proceeded sluggishly, as if the power had been disconnected. The students were more subdued, demonstrating greater concentration. It wasn't fear that prompted their actions, but a heightened understanding. A tangible change had occurred. Mrs. Holbrook attempted to resume her previous approach. Her tone remained even, yet her hands trembled slightly as she handled the marker. She avoided eye contact, refrained from calling on Malik, and made no further mention of civic responsibility. Malik, meanwhile, adopted a more upright posture. He displayed no smile. He made no effort to demonstrate anything. He simply listened, recorded notes, responded to questions when prompted, as was his usual practice. This time, however, the students were attentive. When the bell signaled the end of class and backpacks were being packed, the students departed more deliberately. Several cast quick looks in Malik's direction as they passed. A few offered a quiet, "See you," or gave subtle nods of acknowledgement. Jasmine paused near the door, appearing as though she desired to speak, but ultimately left with her friends. Bryce remained near Malik's desk. "Are you all right?" Bryce asked. "I'm fine," Malik replied. Then he didn't raise his voice. Bryce affirmed. It wasn't necessary. What resonated most with people was the manner in which Mayor Jefferson entered that classroom, conveyed what was necessary, and departed without raising his voice. There was no yelling, no intimidation, no theatrical display. He simply stated the truth. And truth requires no amplification. It only needs to be spoken. Subsequently that afternoon, Mrs. Holbrook sat alone at her desk as the halls emptied. Her fingers paused above her keyboard, a blank email draft displayed before her. The expression in Anthony Jefferson's eyes lingered in her thoughts. It wasn't anger, nor cruelty, simply disappointment, and a certainty as if he'd witnessed similar actions repeatedly and was weary of them. She replayed her words, not only those spoken to Malik, but those spoken near him about him. The sarcasm, the tone, the incredulity, they now reverberated, prominent and unwelcome. No reprimand had been issued. No public exposure had occurred. However, the sense of shame was genuine, and it remained. She closed the email without composing a reply. Later that evening, Malik was on the couch completing his homework when his dad entered the room. He loosened his tie and sat down next to him. "You conducted yourself admirably," Anthony remarked. Malik looked up. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't yield, you didn't recede, and that's significant," his father responded. Malik shut his notebook. "Why didn't you speak to her earlier?" he inquired. "I wanted you to develop your own voice initially," his father explained. However, when someone discredits your reputation in front of a group of people, it's no longer a subtle matter. It becomes a public affair. And I don't allow public disrespect to go unaddressed. Malik paused briefly. He observed that she appeared frightened, and she should have felt responsible. A period of silence followed, where they felt at ease and were being truthful. Subsequently, Malik's mom brought in dinner. The television displayed the evening news in the background. The school remained quiet. There were no announcements or public discussion, but the necessary events had transpired. The following day at school, an altered atmosphere prevailed. It wasn't a miraculous resolution, but a palpable shift. Mrs. Holbrook addressed the class with a more subdued demeanor. She refrained from excessive corrections or a manufactured apology, and the sharpness was absent from her voice. Her eyes no longer expressed frustration when Malik raised his hand. And when he briefly referred to his father in a writing assignment, she remained silent. Malik's classmates gave him more room. Some even showed him a quiet deference, not due to his father's identity, but because of how he had dealt with the situation. Calm, honest, steadfast. These were the qualities that resonated. However, even as the familiar patterns returned, one thing became evident. The truth had been disseminated, and the surrounding hush had finally ceased. The Monday following, the school hallways were as lively as they always were. The sound of sneakers on the floor, the clang of lockers, and the echoes of laughter filled the hallways. Yet, a subtle change had occurred, not only in room 204, but throughout the entire school. Students were no longer speaking about Malik in hushed tones. Instead, they observed him with a different kind of attention, not with the air of legend, not with the amusement of a shared joke, but with the recognition of someone who had faced a challenge head-on and remained steadfast. Malik walked through the hall with Bryce, as was their usual routine. But Bryce was the first to recognize it. Students seemed to make way a bit faster. Some even offered silent nods as they passed. It wasn't from fear, it was a sign of respect. It wasn't solely because Malik's dad held the office of mayor, it was Malik's own quiet confidence, which needed no justification. At lunchtime, Jasmine finally went to their table. "Hey," she said, holding her tray. Malik looked up. "Hi." Malik paused. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to laugh. I didn't think it was amusing. I don't know." He reassured her. "It's all right," he said. "Just, please don't participate next time." She acknowledged him, seeming slightly ashamed, and left. That's the nature of change. It doesn't always manifest as a significant event. Occasionally, it comes through uncomfortable dialogues and understated choices. Mrs. Holbrook never issued a formal apology. However, during the subsequent week, she began phrasing her inquiries differently. She included Malik more frequently. She smiled, but not with that rigid, artificial expression. It was presented in a manner suggesting an attempt at improvement, even without expressing it verbally. She also sent a handwritten, brief note home at the end of the week. Malik continues to contribute insight and maturity to the classroom. "Thank you for raising such a respectful young man." His father read it in the kitchen and remained silent. He simply handed it to Malik and offered a quiet nod of approval. In the weeks that followed, Malik's name was no longer solely connected to his father. Children began sharing stories about how he consistently provided the best answers in science class. They recalled how he assisted Ava in locating her missing library book. They noted how he defended a third grader who had dropped his tray in the lunchroom. The narrative concerning the mayor entering room 204 was, naturally, still recounted. However, it wasn't the humorous ending that resonated. It was the underlying message. That dignity carries more weight than loudness. That truth doesn't invariably require corroboration, but warrants acknowledgement. It's important that even a classroom, particularly a classroom, should not be a place where someone is told what they cannot be. Malik did not revisit the matter. He didn't need to. He demonstrated what needed demonstrating. His father had expressed what needed expressing, and the silence that previously attempted to overwhelm him had been broken. Several weeks later, during an assembly concerning leadership, the principal highlighted the significance of presence. She refrained from naming anyone, yet all those seated in the folding chairs understood the subject of her remarks. Prior to their departure that afternoon, Bryce turned to Malik and quietly said, "You know she was referencing you, correct?" Malik offered a slight shrug. "Perhaps." Bryce smiled. "The next occasion someone accuses you of dishonesty, I'm merely gesturing towards the door and anticipating your dad's arrival." Malik chuckled. No way. Next time, I'll address it personally. And he was sincere. While his dad had walked in that day to say what needed to be said, Malik had done something even harder. He stayed. He sat through the laughter, the whispers, the weight of being doubted. And he never faltered. And that kind of strength doesn't come from titles or headlines. It comes from knowing who you are, even when someone else tries to rewrite your story. Some bruises fade, but lessons, the ones worth remembering, they last a lifetime. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who would benefit from hearing it. Stories like this are important, as respect, identity, and truth should never be compromised. A 12-year-old boy, Tyrese Porter, entered a bank to deposit his birthday money. What should have been a proud moment became embarrassing until his mother arrived and altered the situation without raising her voice. Tyrese Porter wasn't typically a nervous child. He was quick with a joke, fast on the court, and intelligent enough to keep up with children 2 grades older. This morning, a clammy feeling gripped his hands, and his breath came in short bursts as he gazed up at the large glass doors of Crestmark Bank on Fremont Avenue in Tempe, Arizona. He had just celebrated his 12th birthday, and this marked his first independent deposit. The envelope within his hoodie pocket contained precisely $220. It was birthday money, a mix of 5s, 10s, and a couple of 20s. Nothing extravagant. For him, this was the culmination of months of effort, supported by Aunt Claudine, Uncle Leo, and his older cousin Ronald, who worked evening shifts at the auto shop. His mother, Dr. Alicia Monroe, had brought him to this location but remained in the car, offering him a final piece of encouragement through the open window. "You got this, baby. Walk in there confidently, as if you belong. Because you do." He nodded, attempting to conceal the tremor in his legs. The sun shone brightly from mid-morning. The sneakers, still dusty from a pickup game the previous night, made a slight squeak on the floor as he entered. The bank was peaceful, not deserted, but peaceful in a relaxed Saturday atmosphere. A man wearing a button-down shirt was at the kiosk, looking at his phone. An older couple occupied the waiting chairs, quietly discussing some paperwork. Only one woman was in line at the counter, signing a document, with her toddler chewing on a deposit slip nearby. Tyrese positioned himself behind her and attempted to regulate his breathing. He glanced down at the envelope, verifying his handwriting on the exterior. "The Porter Savings." He had rehearsed his signature 3 times the previous night, not because he was required to, but because it seemed like the appropriate action. He observed the digital cue board advance to the subsequent number. The woman and her toddler departed. The bank teller did not even lift her head as she announced, "Next." Tyrese moved forward. "Hello," he said, polite and firm, just as his mother had instructed. "I'm here to deposit into my savings." The teller's eyes lifted slowly. Her name tag indicated she was Margaret Delaney. She appeared to be in her late 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair and a largely unchanging, tight-lipped expression. She offered no smile, no greeting in return. Instead, her gaze immediately fell upon the envelope he held. "And where did you obtain that sum of money?" Tyrese blinked, uncertain if he had understood her question correctly. "It's my birthday money," he stated, raising the envelope slightly. "My aunt and my cousin had given it to me. I simply wanted to deposit it." "Uh-huh," she responded, interrupting him. She bent forward across the counter, examining the bills as if they were questionable. "Do you possess a state-issued ID?" Tyrese paused. "No, Mom, just my school ID and my account number. My mom opened it with me last summer." Margaret released a slow breath through her nose. With the tone adults use when they've had enough of dealing with someone, she shifted her gaze toward a nearby colleague, then returned her attention to Tyrese. "I'm going to need to verify all of this," she stated. "You could be anyone, and this could be anything." Tyrese's chest tightened. He looked down at the envelope again, as if it might have somehow changed since he walked in. But it was still just an envelope, still his name, still the money he'd been given, fair and square. "I can give you the account number," he said. His voice remained calm, but it softened. Margaret did not respond. Instead, she turned to pick up the phone near her station. "I'm calling the manager to assist. Please wait." The man at the kiosk had now turned to observe. The older couple whispered something, their eyes moving toward the boy at the counter. Tyrese felt his face flush, and he tried to avoid looking up. He reached into his backpack for the small blue bank booklet his mom had given him. It didn't seem promising, but Margaret no longer focused on him. She was engaged in a phone conversation, occasionally looking his way with a tense expression. Tyrese felt a knot in his throat. This wasn't the plan. However, the moment she ended the call, things began to deteriorate quicker than he could manage. Margaret placed the phone down with a gentle click and directed a sharp look at Tyrese, as if assessing him for a situation he hadn't agreed to. "Someone will be with you in a minute," she stated briefly. She then focused on her computer screen, her fingers tapping as if he'd disappeared from her view entirely. Tyrese stood there, uncertain whether to speak or simply wait. He looked down at the envelope again. It wasn't trembling, but his hands felt rigid now, as if they didn't quite belong to him. The lobby felt colder, not in temperature, but in feeling. It was as if the atmosphere changed when she asked that first question. The man from the kiosk was still observing. One of the tellers was situated a few windows down. There was no verbal communication, but their eyes consistently averted, quickly glancing away each time Tyrese made eye contact. A tall man wearing a dark gray tie emerged from a hallway located behind the counter. His name tag identified him as Kenneth Flores, branch manager. He moved towards Tyrese deliberately, maintaining a polite demeanor but with a reserved customer service expression that concealed his thoughts. "Hi there," Kenneth stated. "Are you attempting to make a deposit?" Tyrese affirmed with a nod. "Yes, sir, into my savings account." He says it's birthday money. Margaret spoke from her desk without looking up. Kenneth briefly glanced at her, then returned his attention to Tyrese. "Do you have an account number on you?" Tyrese provided the small blue booklet and the slip with his account info. Kenneth took them and began typing into a tablet. "I don't have a state ID," Tyrese added, his voice quieter now. "Just school, I'm 12. Kenneth paused for half a second. 12? And you came in by yourself?" Kenneth nodded once. "Yes, sir," his mom said. "Okay, can I take a look at the money?" Tyrese offered the envelope. Kenneth opened it with care, as if handling explosives, and began counting the bills directly at the counter. Meanwhile, Margaret commented, "I just thought we should be cautious. You never know these days." Her words felt like a sharp rebuke. Tyrese stopped moving. He wasn't sure if a response was expected. He felt uneasy, but remained still. The issue wasn't precisely her words, but the manner in which she delivered them. It felt as though he was being assessed as a risk, a potential danger, an issue requiring control. Kenneth remained silent, completing his count before turning to Tyrese. 220, correct?" Tyrese confirmed with a nod. "Okay, I need a moment. I'll verify the account." As Kenneth moved away, Tyrese stood still, the envelope no longer in his grasp. A constriction formed in his throat. He resisted the urge to cry, unwilling to do so in the presence of unfamiliar people. He attempted to recall what his mom always said: "You're not the problem, baby. You're the reason someone else gets to grow today." However, at that moment, it didn't feel like anyone was learning anything. A woman a few spots behind in line appeared as though she might speak. She opened her mouth, then simply looked at her phone instead. When Kenneth returned, he handed Tyrese the slip confirming the account and deposit total. "You're all set," he said. "It's gone through," Tyrese whispered, thanking him. As he turned to leave, Margaret quietly added, "Better safe than sorry." The comment wasn't loud, but it was audible. Tyrese halted his departure. His ears burned once more. He desired to leave, yet also felt compelled to say something, anything at all. Instead, he simply reversed direction toward the exit, suppressing the words he couldn't voice. However, beyond those doors, a pair of eyes had been observing, and they weren't about to remain silent any longer. The glass door opened slowly, and a woman entered, her presence immediately altering the atmosphere. Dr. Alicia Monroe commanded attention without speaking. Her blazer was a crisp slate blue with subtle pinstripes, and her heels clicked across the polished floor with purpose. Alicia carried herself with an air of assuredness. Heads turned, some driven by curiosity, others by a natural response. She wasn't seeking attention. However, she was here for her son. The moment she entered, Tyrese noticed her. His shoulders tightened, not with fear, but with something akin to relief. It was like finding the handle on a locked door. Margaret looked up. Her expression tightened briefly, as if anticipating this moment. Alicia didn't immediately go to the counter. Instead, she walked directly to her son, placed a gentle hand on his back, and spoke to him, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "You okay?" Tyrese nodded, though not convincingly. She refrained from pushing the matter. Instead, she shifted her attention to the counter, making eye contact with Margaret, then Kenneth, who had returned, perceiving a change in the atmosphere. "Good morning," Alicia stated, her voice steady and composed. "I'm Dr. Alicia Monroe. Tyrese is my son." Kenneth adjusted his throat and offered a brief, polite smile. "Yes, ma'am, everything is handled. His deposit has been processed." "That isn't what I'm here to discuss," she responded. Her voice remained level. There was no need to raise it. Each word broke the silence. "I observed my son enter here independently today, displaying pride and readiness to accomplish something adults frequently advise children to do, to be responsible. Rather than receiving guidance, he experienced questioning, doubt, and humiliation." Margaret's face reddened. "Ma'am, I was simply adhering to protocol. Your protocol does not involve accusing a child of suspicious conduct because he arrived with cash on his birthday." Kenneth intervened promptly. "Dr. Monroe, I want to assure you that was not our goal." Alicia turned slightly, her hands remaining still at her sides. "Are you aware of how many accounts my company maintains with this bank, Mr. Flores?" Kenneth moved slightly. "I understand there are three. Langford Innovations, your personal account, and Monroe Education Group." "That is correct," she confirmed. "I have directly instructed more than 300 young students in this city regarding financial literacy, predominantly black and brown, many of whom are entering environments where they face immediate judgment. Therefore, I am not unfamiliar with this discussion." A silence descended upon the lobby. Even the toddler from earlier had become quiet. Margaret began to speak, but Alicia raised her hand, not to cut her off, but to momentarily suspend the discussion. "This extends beyond just Tyrese. This concerns every child who enters a place like this and is told, whether subtly or overtly, that they don't belong, that they must demonstrate something that no one else is required to demonstrate. Do you request state identification from every child, or just mine?" Margaret's voice lowered. "That isn't equitable. It's unjust to impose that burden on a 12-year-old simply because you presume something about him before he even greets you." Alicia retreated slightly and indicated her son. He entered the space, behaving as we instruct parents to guide their children. Rather than receiving recognition for his efforts, he was perceived as a potential problem. The elderly couple in the waiting area briefly looked at each other. One of them offered a deliberate nod. While not everyone appeared at ease, they seemed alert. Tyrese observed his mom with wide eyes. It wasn't simply the content of her words that surprised him, but also her delivery. Calm, deliberate. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she seek sympathy. She spoke truthfully before those who were present. "I'm not requesting an apology," Alicia stated finally. "I am requesting awareness." Yet, as the impact of her words became apparent, Tyrese remained silent, as something within him still felt the need to complete what he began. A brief stillness fell over the room. Kenneth stood rigidly behind the counter, his hands clasped together, reminiscent of a school principal delivering a lecture. Margaret's gaze had dropped, focused on the laminated calendar close to her keyboard. The branch was silent, unusually so. However, Tyrese wasn't noticing any of that. He remained looking at his mom. She hadn't spoken loudly. She didn't need to. The way she held herself was striking, as if each word she selected was a brick intentionally set. He understood she was upset. He sensed it in the tightness of her shoulders. Beyond that, she possessed a protective, steady, and unwavering nature. He aspired to emulate those qualities. "Tyrese," she stated, turning slightly. He paused, surprised by her question. He had assumed she would manage the situation as she typically did, sheltering him and resolving issues to spare him involvement. However, she was now presenting him with an option. He glanced at the adults behind the counter. He observed the woman who had made him feel like an outsider. He glanced back at his mom, who stood there as a barrier between him and a world that hadn't yet learned how to properly interact with him. He inhaled deeply. "I came in here to complete the tasks adults had instructed me to do," he stated. His voice faltered slightly, but he persevered. "Preserve my money, manage it independently, demonstrate responsibility." His hand clenched around the unused envelope still folded in his pocket. "I wasn't anticipating any festivities or the like," he added. Margaret looked up at him now. Her expression had softened. "I had everything needed, my belongings, my account information, and my school ID. I remained composed throughout, even when I couldn't grasp the reason for the different treatment. He didn't explicitly state it was due to my race, wasn't necessary. The atmosphere made the assumption clear. I simply wanted to deposit my money in the bank," Tyrese concluded. "That was my only wish." He turned to Kenneth. "My hope is that no one else experiences something similar." Kenneth nodded slowly. "You're right, and I'm sorry you were made to feel that way." Alicia listened, raising her chin slightly. "We should have done better," he added. Margaret, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "I misread the situation." "I did, and I'm sorry, Tyrese." Her tone softened now, not entirely without defensiveness, but closer to sincerity. The reason for her words, guilt or understanding, remained unclear, but at least she acknowledged it. Alicia didn't respond immediately. She turned to Tyrese once more. "Ready?" she inquired. He offered a small nod. "Not yet." Kenneth appeared puzzled. "Is there anything else we can do?" Tyrese turned back towards the counter. "Can I make the deposit again?" A moment of quiet followed. Alicia smiled faintly. Kenneth quietly chuckled. "It's already been processed, but we can review it again." Symbolically, Tyrese moved forward and retrieved the blue bank booklet. Kenneth accepted the booklet and retrieved a new deposit slip. "Please complete this one," he said. Tyrese took the pen and wrote deliberately, ensuring a steady hand. He presented the slip, and Kenneth stamped it, acknowledging the action even though it held no practical effect. The focus transcended the numerical entries within the system. It represented a symbolic act of recovering what had been unjustly lost. Margaret observed quietly as Tyrese retrieved the slip, folded it into his booklet, and faced his mom again. "All done," he announced. "Let's go," Alicia responded. Yet her gaze paused briefly. On Margaret, then Kenneth, then the young man her son was rapidly developing. But outside, as they entered the bright Arizona sunlight, an unspoken tension remained between them, something that required discussion before they departed. The parking lot was half full, a typical midday pause where heat waves rose from windshields and voices floated from open car windows. Inside the Monroe sedan, everything was still. Alicia closed the driver's side door carefully. Tyrese fastened his seatbelt, then looked out the window for a few silent moments. The building appeared different now, smaller, less imposing. But the feeling of tension in his chest hadn't completely disappeared. "Want to talk about it?" she asked gently. He didn't respond immediately. Why did she look at me that way? Alicia didn't hurry with her response. She reclined in her seat and inhaled, as if she's answered this question previously, but not in this manner. "Because she formed an opinion about who you are before you spoke." "That's unfair." "No," she stated. "It isn't." Tyrese glanced at the envelope once more. Still empty. Still neatly folded. "I haven't done anything wrong." "You haven't?" she inquired. Sometimes the world reacts to perceptions rather than reality. Tyrese remained silent. Then a question arose. Would she have requested all of that if I were a white kid? Alicia's jaw tightened subtly. It wasn't anger, but more like a pain she'd learned to carry so well that it didn't always surface. She responded no. Probably not. They contemplated that reality for a time. It was an uncomfortable feeling. It wasn't meant to be pleasant, but it was truthful. I felt lost for words at that moment. Tyrese spoke softly. "I believe that expressing frustration would only exacerbate the situation." Alicia turned to him. "You performed precisely as expected. You remained composed." You voiced your thoughts when prepared, and you presented the truth. Tyrese made eye contact with her. You did not appear displeased that I initially remained silent. She shook her head. No, I felt admiration for you. I still feel admiration for you. He nodded slowly. The tightness in his shoulders began to lessen slightly. Alicia adjusted her seatbelt and focused on the road ahead. This is the reason I encourage you. Why do I expect so much? Not because perfection is required, but because sometimes that's what people expect just for you to be equal. I hate that. I know, she responded. Me too. A beat passed. I wanted her to feel embarrassed, Tyrese said. I wanted her to feel small. I get that, she said. But the goal isn't to shrink people down. It's to open their eyes. Let them carry what they've done, so they can choose to do better next time. But what if they don't? Then that's on them, not on you. Tyrese rested his head against the seat. She didn't offer an apology until you arrived. Alicia observed her son, speaking softly. Occasionally, individuals only behave properly when they understand that the person they are disregarding possesses influence. It isn't correct. However, it occurs. She ought to have treated me with respect from the beginning. Agreed. They remained silent for a brief period. A vehicle parked 2 spaces down, and a woman emerged with a boy, approximately 5 or 6 years old, clutching a plastic coin bank. Alicia offered a small smile. Notice that? Another parent guiding their child in learning about money. Tyrese gazed out the window. I hope he isn't subjected to the experiences I faced. I hope someone like you is present when he arrives. That comment brought a smile to Tyrese's face for the first time that day. He looked at his mom. Do you believe I made a positive impact today? Alicia hesitated. I believe you accomplished something few people would do. You entered there with pride. You exited with your dignity. And along the way, you compelled people to confront their own reflections. He gazed back at the building. Next time I visit, I desire to go alone again. Alicia smiled. That's wise. As she inserted the key into the ignition, there remained one more lesson Tyrese needed to grasp. Something she'd withheld since the moment he entered that bank. The car emitted a quiet hum as Alicia turned the key, but she paused before driving away. Her hand rested on the gear shift, her fingers still for a moment. There's something I didn't tell you, she said, her eyes fixed forward. Tyrese looked over. About what? About that bank? About Margaret. He waited. I've been there before, she said a few months ago. I was opening a secondary business account, and she was the one who helped me. Tyrese blinked. Seriously? She wasn't rude, but she wasn't warm either. She recalled thinking she was distant, like she had somewhere more important to be. I dismissed it as a difficult day. He frowned. So, were you already aware of her behavior? Alicia nodded. I suspected something, but I didn't anticipate you experiencing the most significant impact. Tyrese glanced out the window again, his jaw clenched. Do you believe she acts this way toward other children? I'm unsure, Alicia responded. However, I recognize what prejudice appears as, masked by a smile or its absence. Tyrese settled back in his seat. He felt frustration, not anger, towards his mom, but rather a burden from the complexity that had enveloped something seemingly straightforward. I don't understand, he murmured. People frequently advise doing the right thing, saving money, being polite, and arriving punctually. Then this occurred. Alicia glanced at him. That's because doing the right thing doesn't always guarantee reciprocal treatment. However, it does mean you're developing something irreplaceable. What's that? Character and memory. The kind that remains with you, so when another child experiences it, you'll know precisely how to react. He paused briefly. Then, will this not be the last instance of this kind of event? Alicia slowly shook her head. Likely not. Tyrese breathed deeply through his nose. That's good, she smiled gently. But next time, the impact won't be the same. You will be prepared, and perhaps the people around you will be more capable too, because you compelled them to confront something they wish to avoid. He examined the envelope, repeatedly opening and closing it as if it were origami. Then he stated, I still want to do it properly. The deposit? You already completed it, she responded, looking at the booklet in his lap. No, return another day. Enter, complete the form, hand it to someone who shows me respect. Alicia's smile widened. You want to repeat the process. I want to conclude things correctly. You said it without pause. Alicia nodded slowly. We will do that when it's convenient for you. Tyrese straightened up. When I do, I won't question my decisions. I'll walk in as if I'm meant to be there, because you're meant to be, she said. You always have been. Don't allow a single moment to diminish you. He considered those words briefly. Afterward, he opened the glove box, placed the envelope inside, and secured it definitively. There's no reason to keep something that's meaningless. She lifted an eyebrow. Are you certain? Yes, I believe I've just made the most significant contribution already, she chuckled. A quiet feeling originating deep within his chest. You truly are your father's son, she remarked. Tyrese smiled. I say that when I'm being clever. You say it when I'm being wise. They departed the parking lot gradually, the bank receding behind them. As the car joined the main road, Tyrese looked down at the deposit booklet one last time before placing it into his backpack. The numbers were visible. However, the most significant aspect wasn't documented. He had acquired it without spending any money. However, before the day concluded, Tyrese had one final statement. It was a truth not found in formal education. They were midway back when Tyrese spoke again. His tone was even, yet his delivery prompted Alicia to look at him. You ever feel tired of having to prove something every time you walk in a room? She didn't respond immediately. The road stretched ahead, flat and unobstructed, the Arizona sun drawing distinct shadows across the dashboard. She understood the importance of thoughtful replies to questions like that. Constantly, she observed Tyrese focused on his hands. I didn't even do anything wrong, he stated. Yet it felt necessary to justify herself, even for a simple deposit. You did, she confirmed. And that's what makes you remarkable, in a positive sense. You entered with honesty and departed with your dignity. You refused to allow them to diminish it. He remained silent for a period. Then, he expressed a desire to not feel anger constantly. You don't need to, she responded. Anger isn't the objective, it's a signal. What follows is what holds significance. Tyrese inclined his head, seemingly contemplating her words. So, how should I handle it? She asked. You must bear it constructively. Allow it to refine you, not to make you unyielding. He nodded, as if processing her advice. Alicia stopped at a gas station, needing to purchase a bottle of water before completing the drive. Stepping from the car, she lightly tossed her keys into Tyrese's lap. Lock the doors if you need to. I won't be long. She then entered the store. For the first time that day, Tyrese found himself alone. This time, he had only his thoughts. He glanced down at the keys, then looked back at the parking lot. It wasn't about the bank anymore. It was about the way people viewed him before he even had a chance to speak. About how his mom had faced challenges he hadn't known existed until today. He felt a sense of needing to stand with more confidence, to shoulder a greater burden, despite the unfairness of it. The car door made a sound as Alicia came back with a chilled bottle of water. She gave it to him silently, returned to the driver's seat, and fastened her seatbelt. Tyrese unscrewed the lid and drank. You know, he said, placing the bottle down, I believe the most difficult aspect wasn't her asking all those questions. It was the expression on her face, as if I wasn't worthy of being present. Alicia nodded thoughtfully. That's the method they employ to make you vanish, she said. Not through words, but through uncertainty, through silence. With that expression, he continued, his voice gaining strength, but I didn't vanish. No, you didn't. She reached out and briefly squeezed his hand, adding, and you won't. Not now, not ever. The remainder of the drive was completed in near silence, but it was a silence that felt substantial, not devoid of meaning. As they arrived at the driveway, Tyrese moved forward and gazed at her. Alicia smiled, as she always did. I'm not just going to remember how they treated me, he stated. I'm going to remember how I responded. That's the lesson, she confirmed. That's what makes you unstoppable. Tyrese opened the door, took his backpack, and hesitated. I think next time, he said, I'll bring someone else with me, such as Jordan or Micah, and teach them how to manage it as well. Alicia's face brightened. That's what leaders do, she said. Tyrese offered a small, assured nod. So, I suppose I'm a leader now. He stepped out into the sun, and this time his footsteps didn't sound nervous or unsure. They sounded like someone who knew exactly where he was going. If this story resonated with you, even in a small way, please don't just scroll past. Share it, discuss it, because every child like Tyrese deserves to enter the world with confidence. And if you're still reading, please subscribe. There's more to come. After a reserved black girl experiences severe bullying at her new school, no one intervenes until her father, a man with a concealed past he's long tried to keep hidden, resolves to speak out. Imani Reddick stood near the side entrance of Halston Middle School, clutching her backpack strap until her fingers hurt. She didn't cry. That wasn't her way. She remained silent, her chin slightly lowered, observing the stream of students who didn't even acknowledge her. She had discovered that remaining unnoticed could offer more protection than being visible. Mobile, Alabama, was not her home. Her home was Savannah, or at least it had been, that old brick apartment with the broken mailbox and the familiar smell of fried fish every Sunday. But her father insisted they needed a fresh beginning. Consequently, they were now living in a duplex with 2 white walls and neighbors who offered no greetings. Her initial week at Halston High had been largely uneventful. The teachers were courteous, her coursework was within her abilities, and the cafeteria food was acceptable. Children possessed a remarkable ability to detect subtle shifts, much like dogs identifying fear. Imani rarely spoke unless necessary. Her father often remarked that her voice carried weight, and she avoided using it for casual conversation. Her hair was styled in precise twists. Her shoes were polished, and her clothes were neatly pressed. She presented a simple, intelligent appearance, avoiding anything ostentatious, simply careful. She actively avoided drawing attention to herself. However, on Thursday, attention sought her out regardless. She walked along the B Hall corridor, on her way to science class, when a tall boy with sunburned cheeks and a smug look blocked her path. "Hey," he said, tilting his head like a puppy feigning friendliness. "You don't talk much, do you?" Imani blinked at him, uncertain if it was a question or a challenge. "What's wrong?" he pressed. "Are you too good to say hi?" She replied softly, attempting to move past. He shifted aside and bumped her shoulder, causing her to stumble slightly. "Chill out." She simply acknowledged him. He didn't respond, continuing his walk, his heartbeat quickening unexpectedly. His name was Tyler McHale. She discovered this later during gym class, when he erupted in laughter during a basketball game and called another student slow as hell, a comment audible to everyone in the room. The other boys joined in his laughter. Even the coach remained largely silent. Tyler McHale was known for a certain behavior, though it was rarely spoken of directly. He belonged to that category of children best left undisturbed, especially if you valued tranquility. Imani recognized the pattern. He possessed the hallmarks: boisterous, presumptuous, and exhibiting a subtle cruelty that often escaped adult observation. That evening, at their residence, her father posed the customary inquiry. "How was school, dear?" She responded with a slight lift of her shoulders. "Okay. Anyone causing you difficulties?" She denied it with a headshake. Darius Reddick scrutinized her expression. His gaze was penetrating. It didn't gloss over details. She held his gaze for a moment, then averted her eyes and began to play with her fork. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" he said. "I know." She didn't elaborate. He didn't press. He always respected boundaries. That's what he's taught her since she was little. A reserved child isn't fragile. They're simply waiting for the appropriate moment to share. Imani hoped that principle still applied. But the atmosphere of Halston was altered. This wasn't Savannah. This wasn't the neighborhood where Miss Charlene looked after her when her dad worked late, or where Mr. Jalen across the street gave her peppermints on Sundays. This place didn't feel like it had people, just moving pieces. On Friday, Tyler walked past her in the lunch line and accidentally knocked her tray sideways. Chicken tenders and mashed potatoes hit the floor. "Oh, my bad," he said with a smirk. "Didn't see you there." Some kids laughed. Others looked away. The cafeteria monitor hardly looked up. Imani crouched to gather the tray, her cheeks flushed but her expression unreadable. She remained silent, simply tidying up and moving to the rear of the queue. Tyler departed as if everything was normal. However, it was significant, especially for her. But that was only the start, and the most difficult moments were still to come. By the second week, the cafeteria event felt like an introduction. Tyler had made it his purpose. Imani didn't understand why. Perhaps it stemmed from her lack of visible reaction compared to others. Or maybe because she didn't appear afraid, despite feeling it. Regardless, Tyler perceived this as a challenge. Initially, it manifested as hushed comments behind her in the hallway. This escalated to staged applause when she responded to questions in class. Following her excellent score on an English pop quiz, he publicly questioned, what's she attempting to demonstrate? Trying to be the teacher's favorite or something. During gym class one day, she was the last person chosen for teams. Tyler, positioned beside the student selecting players, whispered, she probably doesn't even sweat like the rest of us. But she thinks she's too good to stink. He spoke loud enough for 3 other boys to overhear. They laughed. Imani didn't respond. Her lack of reaction served as her shield. However, silence can sometimes exacerbate the situation. By Wednesday, the conflict escalated to physical actions. One morning, she entered class to discover someone had written "mute monkey" across her desk in pencil. She paused, studying the words briefly, before retrieving her eraser. Her hand moved deliberately as she erased. She detected muffled laughter nearby. Later that afternoon, in the hallway, Tyler passed by and murmured, "Better get used to it." That evening, she returned home with a torn strap on her backpack. Her father immediately observed the damage. "What happened?" Darius inquired. "It got caught in the locker hinge," she replied. He remained silent, not meeting her gaze, for a significant pause. Then, in a measured tone, he asked, "You sure about that?" She confirmed with a nod. "Yeah." Darius observed her for a few more seconds, his expression strained. He rose, proceeded to the kitchen, and opened a drawer. Returning with an antique sewing kit, he began to mend the strap while she sat at the table, feigning study. The quiet returned. It wasn't oppressive, just commonplace. She understood he was hesitant. She also recognized he would wait however long she required. A tightness began to build within her, feelings she couldn't articulate. Friday proved to be particularly difficult. During lunchtime, Tyler positioned himself directly across from her, without an invitation or a tray, simply offering a smile. "You don't enjoy conversation, do you?" he remarked, tapping the table with his fingers. "Are you one of those peculiar individuals? Do you believe yourself superior to others?" Imani continued eating, deliberately slow, bite after bite. "I asked you a question," he stated, raising his voice. "Or are you too unintelligent to respond?" Those nearby began to observe the exchange. Several phones were unavailable. Imani glanced up at last. "No," she stated. "No what?" She asked. "I don't believe I'm improved. I simply dislike waste." Immediately after the words were spoken, a plate of spaghetti launched from the periphery. It struck her chest, coating her shirt with red sauce and onto her lap. Amusement rang out. She rose deliberately, making no effort to clean the sauce, simply fixing her gaze on Tyler. His eyes widened, not with fear, merely with surprise. The lunch monitor arrived, predictably late. "What happened?" she asked, her expression already frustrated. Imani remained silent, instead choosing to gather her tray and proceed to the closest trash can. Sauce dripped, and her shirt was stained. Her heart pounded in her chest. That night, she skipped dinner. Her father knocked twice on her door before entering. She was seated on the floor, altering the shirt in her sketch pad, drawing thick black lines over what used to be white cotton. "Baby girl," he said quietly. She didn't answer. He came and sat beside her. "I've been keeping my peace," he said, "trying to let you breathe, give you time. But I know something's going on, and I ain't the type to just sit back while my daughter's hurting." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I can handle it." "I know you can," he said. However, that shouldn't necessarily be the case. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was how near things were to spiraling out of control. It happened the following Tuesday. The school day felt long and tiresome. Imani kept her head down, remained in the back of classrooms, and avoided the cafeteria entirely. She learned which bathrooms were usually empty, which hallways had working cameras, and which ones didn't. However, you can't account for everything. Following sixth period, she was walking along the east hallway. The walls were bare, the lockers were damaged, and there was little movement. Her backpack felt unusually heavy, not due to books, but from the burden she carried within. Feelings of anger, shame, and a nameless sensation that lingered behind her eyes, occasionally causing them to sting without explanation. Then she detected it, the sound of footsteps behind her. Rapid. She didn't look back, simply increasing her pace. However, a sudden shove followed. Forceful. Her shoulder impacted the metal lockers. Her bag slipped from her arm and landed on the floor. "What's your problem, freak?" Tyler's voice echoed behind her, too loud for the space. Imani turned slowly, breathing through her nose. "I'm not bothering you," she said. "Do you think you can disrespect me in front of everybody and get away with it?" He stepped closer. "Go away, Tyler. Or what? I'll tell someone." He grinned. "Like who? Those teachers that don't even look at you? Please." Imani didn't move, didn't blink. Tyler looked down, then abruptly reached for her backpack. She moved to obstruct him. A misjudgment. He pushed her again, this time using both hands. She stumbled. Her shoe snagged on the wall trim, and her head impacted the corner of the locker with a muted, unpleasant sound. She fell to the floor, as if her supports had been severed. A moment of stillness followed. Even Tyler recoiled slightly. Imani remained motionless. Blood began to trickle down the side of her face, a single streak across her cheek. A janitor located down the hall abruptly rounded the corner. His mop stopped in its motion. "Hey, what is happening?" he exclaimed, hurrying toward the scene. Tyler ran. The ambulance arrived in just minutes. The principal appeared suddenly, with a phone in hand, a worried tone of voice, and a visibly pale expression. The quiet moment they had previously afforded Tyler had vanished. By the time Darius received the notification, Imani was already at Springdale Medical Center. A nurse informed him that she was awake but required stitches. She sustained a mild concussion and had swelling on the left side of her face. He remained silent. He entered her room, his eyes carefully observing every detail, as if committing it to memory. She appeared smaller in the hospital bed. Not delicate, merely smaller than he recalled. She turned her head slowly upon seeing him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That was what affected him deeply. "Don't," he said, kneeling beside the bed. "Don't apologize." Her lips trembled. "You instructed me to inform you when I required your presence. I am here now," he stated. He remained still. He sat with her for hours. He barely blinked. Nurses came and went. At one point, he asked one of them, gently, how many times the school had called about incidents with Imani. The nurse looked at her chart, then looked back at him. The answer was none. He stared straight ahead after that. When they finally got home, Imani went straight to bed. Darius didn't. He sat in the dark at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes locked on a spot on the wall. He rose, proceeded to the rear closet, and retrieved an aged shoebox. The contents were innocuous. No weapons were present. No firearms. No blades. Only a folded sheet of paper, a photograph of a man he hadn't seen in 10 years, and a telephone number penned in diminishing blue ink. He examined it intently. Subsequently, he grasped the telephone and initiated a call. "Hello?" A voice responded. "It's me," Darius stated. A pause ensued. "Didn't expect to ever hear from you. I require information." "Regarding what?" "A boy. Caucasian. 13 years old. Tyler McHale." A mobile phone notification. A moment of silence. What is the meaning of this? He had admitted my daughter to the hospital. A lengthy pause followed. Then, one day prior, Darius terminated the call. He remained motionless, suspended in quiet. A part of him, long suppressed and deeply concealed, began to react. It wasn't anger, not even aggression, simply heightened awareness. However, making a call of that nature meant inviting consequence. And once a path was opened, unwelcome elements often entered, difficult to retract. 15 years ago, Darius Reddick was recognized under a different identity. In Savannah, The name Deke commanded attention. He wasn't boisterous, nor did he act impulsively, yet he consistently achieved his objectives. His methods were subtle, a quietness that instilled unease. Debts were settled, and disappearances were understood, thanks to him. He avoided direct violence, except in matters close to him, which were infrequent. Deke didn't seek a leadership role. He shunned the public eye. He positioned himself just behind those in power, and that's where true influence resided. But then Marissa became pregnant. Marissa wasn't living on the streets. She was pursuing her education to become a nurse. She was known for her beauty, directness, and intelligence. When she informed Darius they were expecting a child, a change occurred within him. He began to contemplate his lasting impact. He thought about what his daughter would perceive when she looked at him. He worried about the number of falsehoods it would require to conceal his true identity from her. Marissa did not survive the delivery. A tragic accident occurred. A rainy night, a drunk driver. She was gone, suddenly. Without warning, Darius was left with only a 5-pound baby girl who inherited her mother's eyes. Following this, he vanished, abandoning Savannah. He severed connections, sold the vehicles, concealed the cash, destroyed the phone, and relocated to smaller towns, securing unassuming jobs and maintaining a solitary existence. For 14 years, he erased himself from view, all for Imani. However, the phone call he initiated that night, after observing her at the hospital, marked the beginning of the unraveling. The individual he contacted, Terrence Bug Nichols, was not a friend. Not really. More like someone utilized when results were needed without interference. 3 days after the call, Bug sent a message. Tyler McHale, son of Curtis McHale, was with Mobile PD. Curtis ran a side job for a while, moving product through impounded vehicles. He was caught 5 years ago, but avoided conviction on a technicality. He still wears the badge. Still corrupt. Darius considered this information. He did not desire vengeance. This was not about harming a child. Understanding that his father was a man who abused his authority to manipulate people was a different matter. It suggested Tyler was acting aggressively because he's avoided repercussions. Someone had instilled in him the belief that there would be no accountability. This ignited a deep anger within Darius, an anger he hadn't felt in a considerable time. He drove across town that night. He parked a few blocks from an old warehouse by the train yard. He knocked once, then twice slow. Bug answered. His face appeared older. His body seemed thicker, but those eyes, still cold. Thought you were out for good. Bug said. I was. Bug gestured for him to come inside. So what changed? Darius looked around. Metal shelves, old crates, a faint hum of radio static in the corner. I need to scare somebody. Bug raised an eyebrow. Scare. I want the message to land, but no blood. Bug chuckled. That ain't your usual style. I'm not that man anymore. Bug looked at him for a long second, then nodded. All right, I got someone who owes me. Real discreet. Ex-military. Now works security. He will leave a note they will remember. No threats. No harm. Just presence, Darius stated. Bug grinned. You want to haunt the man. Precisely. 2 days later, Curtis McHale returned home to discover his front door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen. However, every drawer had been opened, and his framed awards were placed face down. A single Polaroid photo rested on his recliner, an image of Curtis from 5 years ago, hands cuffed, head down, flanked by officers. On the back, a simple sentence. If anything happens to my child again, yours is next. Curtis failed to report the incident. He understood the protocol. This was not something you concealed. During that same week, Tyler ceased attending school. There was no official notification. No farewell. Imani observed his absence, but remained silent. She returned to her classes, head held high, quiet, but no longer concealed. However, Darius recognized that revisiting the past doesn't always allow it to settle. Occasionally, it resurfaces with anger. The house phone rang shortly after 11:30 p.m. Darius seldom answered calls from numbers he didn't recognize, but a feeling compelled him to answer. He remained silent, simply waiting. A low, familiar, and dry voice spoke. You made noise, Deke. Darius paused before responding. Then he requested silence, just a presence. The voice emitted a chuckle. Yeah, well, some presence echoes louder than you think. Darius gripped the phone more firmly. Who is this? The voice inquired. You remember Devin Mars? That name caused a sharp, uncomfortable feeling in his throat. Devin Mars had previously worked as a problem solver in Savannah. Uncompromising, precise, and driven by ambition. Darius had wronged him several years prior when Mars threatened someone Darius valued. The incident concluded with a tense confrontation that was never discussed. Until now. He currently resides in Pensacola, involved in real estate, nightclubs, and politics. His child attends Halston Prep. Rumors suggest he's become aware of your name once more. And he's displeased. Darius leaned back in his chair, the kitchen clock ticking behind him like a countdown. I'm no longer part of that world. Then why was your name being circulated again? Click. The line disconnected. For the next hour, Darius remained silent. His thoughts raced. Devin Mars did not forgive, and he did not forget. If his name was being passed around, that meant others were paying attention as well. It wasn't just about Tyler anymore. It was about what people believed Darius might become again. The mere thought of it made his stomach churn. He recalled Imani, how she used to fall asleep on his chest. She remembered how she'd learned to walk with her arms out like wings. He'd promised her a different life, a quiet one. But quiet wasn't always safe. At school, people noticed Imani was walking a little taller. She didn't smile much, but her silence now felt different. Less like retreat, more like strength. Her teacher, Miss Kendrick, pulled her aside after class. I just want to say I'm sorry we didn't do more. We should have, she said. Imani looked her in the eye. I am not relying on others to act appropriately anymore. Miss Kendrick stopped. You possess more strength than you realize. However, strength was insufficient on its own. On that Friday, a black SUV with tinted windows arrived outside the school precisely as the final bell sounded. The vehicle was not the property of a parent, and it remained parked. Imani observed it. A feeling, not of fear but of familiarity, churned in her stomach. She didn't know who was inside, but she had seen a car like that previously, back in Savannah. Following her grandmother's funeral, she informed her father that evening. Darius didn't inquire. He simply moved to the rear room and retrieved a phone from a drawer. Instead of contacting Bug, he dialed another number. A woman answered, her voice raspy, reminiscent of gravel and whiskey. It's been a long time, Deke. Too long, Tanya. I heard you went soft. I did on purpose, he replied. She chuckled once. That's good, but now you're calling. I need eyes on a vehicle. A black SUV with Florida license plates was parked outside Halston Middle School. A moment of silence followed. Then, a voice said, I'll have something for you tomorrow. That night, Darius remained near Imani's bedroom door. This wasn't due to a lack of faith in the locks. It was simply the spot where he felt most at ease. The following day, Tanya returned the call. The vehicles are connected to Mars nightclub. They are not registered in his name, but his driver utilizes them. Imani's school is not part of his typical route. Darius took a deep breath. He is currently not taking any action. He was either sending a message or anticipating one from you. That afternoon, Darius drove to Pensacola. There were no weapons and no threats. Only an old envelope containing a picture of Marissa, Imani's mother. He gave it to the security guard at Mars Club. He instructed the guard to tell Deke that this was now the only thing that mattered, and that if anything happened to her, he would not engage in conversation. The guard remained silent, accepting the envelope and retreating as if it were hazardous material. Darius did not wait for acknowledgement and returned home in silence. When individuals such as Mars are provoked, they do not allow the matter to drop. They identify vulnerabilities, and Darius possessed one. It began with a package. Small, plain, without a return address. It was sitting on Darius's porch 2 mornings after his trip to Pensacola. He understood he should not touch it immediately. He examined it, studied the corners. There were no wires. There was no unusual weight. Nevertheless, he opened it outdoors, cautiously, using a pocket knife he hadn't used in years. Inside was a USB drive. Nothing else. He brought inside. He connected it to the older laptop he's kept isolated from network. The screen displayed a solitary video file. It was labeled property. He initiated playback. Grainy security camera footage from a grocery store parking lot appeared. Imani was visible near the front entrance, using her phone. Then a figure entered the scene. He didn't approach her. He didn't speak. He simply stood across the lot facing her, watching. Subsequently, he walked away. The camera followed his movement. He was a white man, with a shaved head, wearing a blue jacket. A face Darius recognized. An old Mars enforcer. Still alive, it seemed. No warning had been given. None was necessary. The meaning was unmistakable. We could contact her whenever we pleased. Darius shut the laptop and remained motionless for a considerable time. Afterward, he entered the bathroom and studied his reflection. He no longer resembled Deke. The beard was flecked with gray. His hands appeared heavier than before. Yet something within him, something cold and sharp, remained untouched. He picked up the phone and initiated one last call. "It's important that they all be present," he stated. 3 hours later, he found himself in the back room of a car shop in Foley. 5 men were seated around him. Each possessed a history they hadn't documented. "Tell me why we're here," one of them inquired. "They threatened my daughter," Darius responded. There was no request for verification. His delivery wasn't challenged. "They intend to intimidate me into submission, but I've remained silent for 14 years. That's sufficient." "So what's the plan?" Darius asked, leaning forward. "We avoid direct confrontation. We pursue the underlying causes. Every man Mars is connected to is exposed. We illuminate them. Their records, their deals, their back channels. We leak everything." "You trying to destroy him?" Darius stated. "I'm reminding him that just because I walked away doesn't mean I forgot how to play." The men nodded. Over the next 3 days, Darius orchestrated a quiet demolition. Public records were sent to journalists. Photos were sent to wives. Hidden accounts were reported to the IRS. One of Mars' clubs suddenly got flagged for health code violations. Yet another establishment lost its liquor license abruptly. The process was handled discreetly and legally. However, the implications were unmistakable. By Friday, the SUV ceased appearing at Imani's school. Mars became silent. There was no retaliation, no communication, but the situation remained unresolved. That evening, Imani returned from school and discovered Darius at the kitchen table with the envelope from the club placed before him. She sat opposite him. For the first time, she inquired, "What did you used to do?" He regarded her for a prolonged period. Then he responded, "I engaged in actions I regret, actions that instilled fear in people, actions that ensured our sustenance." She acknowledged this slowly. "And now I'm striving to become someone different." She paused. "But you reverted to those actions to safeguard me." "I reverted to protect you from those who disregard the established guidelines. Not out of desire, because it was necessary." She remained silent for a moment. "I wish to no longer experience fear," she stated finally. He reached across the table. "You're not anymore." They remained seated for a while. As evening approached, no elaborate words were needed. It was a moment of shared understanding between two people. The following week at school, Imani offered to read her essay in English class. Her voice was steady. The essay explored courage, not the dramatic kind seen in films, but the courage to appear regardless, to speak even when hesitant, and to remain upright despite external pressure. Following the class, Ms. Kendrick offered a subtle smile, conveying a sense of pride. Imani returned the gesture, a quiet but genuine expression. Darius understood that peace achieved in this manner invariably demanded a price. He only hoped he had paid sufficiently. Spring arrived in Mobile Sutley that year. The trees bordering the schoolyard became vibrant and lush, and the days extended slightly. It had been nearly 2 months since Imani had last seen Tyler McHale's face. She never learned precisely what had transpired with him. Speculation circulated. He transferred schools. His dad took a leave. His family relocated. However, no one provided verification, and Imani had no desire to inquire. Her attention was now directed elsewhere. When Northwood High School announced the annual student-led assembly, Ms. Kendrick urged Imani to participate, to do more than simply attend, to speak. Initially, she felt unsure. However, something within her changed. A form of understated bravery emerged. It wasn't boisterous or flamboyant, but resolute, much like herself. Consequently, she registered. On the day of the event, as her name was announced, the gym grew almost silent. Teachers leaned forward. Students ceased their whispers. Imani walked to the podium with her hands at her sides. Her notes were folded in one pocket, untouched. She surveyed the crowd. Rows of students who had once laughed at her now ignored her or simply averted their gaze. And she began. My name is Imani Reddick. A few months ago, I wished no one would know my name. I didn't want to be noticed. I believed that staying quiet would keep me safe. She paused. But silence doesn't always guarantee safety. Occasionally, it merely renders you unseen by those who could offer assistance. It was painfully obvious to those who intended harm. Several people looked my way, and some averted their gaze. I experienced bullying. It wasn't due to any action on my part, simply because I didn't align with someone else's preconceived notion of how I should appear. It was a painful experience, and it diminished my sense of self. She briefly looked towards the back of the gym, where Darius stood partially obscured, with his arms crossed, observing her. However, I realized that silence does not equate to strength. Understanding when and to whom it's important to speak. That is strength. I believed I needed to manage everything independently. I was mistaken. She averted her gaze, then returned her attention upwards. I now have an advocate for me, not simply offering verbal support, but demonstrating tangible assistance. And I want every person present to acknowledge this, particularly those who have felt as I once did. You are not obligated to face challenges alone. The initial response was silence, a pause where the words resonated powerfully and truthfully. Then, a single clap broke the stillness. It was followed by others, until the room was filled with applause. Imani moved forward without a smile. It wasn't necessary. Her words carried the impact. Following the assembly, several students came to speak with her. They were subdued and showed deference. Many simply expressed their gratitude. Others offered their apologies. A few inquired about spending time together. She paused, considering her response. That evening, back at home, Darius prepared grilled chicken on the patio. The aroma of charcoal and sweet onions filled the air. Imani sat close by, her knees drawn to her chest, observing the dancing flames. Did you truly mean what you expressed? Darius questioned. He flipped the meat once. Then he glanced at her. Your mother. She used to speak like that. Imani smiled. You think she'd be pleased? I know she would. A silence followed. She'd also say I'm allowing you to mature too quickly, he added. Imani laughed once. You sort of are. He chuckled. I suppose we're both learning. Later, as the sun dipped behind the houses, they sat in quietness. Not the kind they used to carry around like armor. This quietness was different, lighter. Imani didn't require her father to be flawless. Her need was simply for his presence. And Darius, acknowledging all he had done and all he had concealed, understood that safeguarding her didn't invariably involve burying the past. Occasionally, it meant accepting responsibility for it, so she wouldn't have to. Existence rarely offers a complete escape from sources of pain. Yet it provides a choice. Remain silent, or voice your truth. Walk independently, or accept another support. Imani opted to speak, and Darius chose to listen. This is how they found healing. As a united front. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to see more. Each story we share explores authentic choices, real people, and the resilience needed to progress, regardless of your beginnings.